Clara Jobson works as a school chaplain in a town on the West Australian coast. Sometimes the kids she works with tell her about what's happening in their homes, and it sounds to Clara like something from her own childhood in Perth. Clara was born into a family involved in gambling and small-time crime. Both Clara and her brother James were given an apprenticeship of sorts, doing odd jobs for their father. There was violence in the home, terrible violence. Clara got out as soon as she could. And after a few wild years, she found something within her and she stabilised. Her brother James, though, became a bikie when he was 17. He belonged to 2 clubs in his life, and he served 7 years in jail. And he was a frightening figure to many people, including at times his own family. Last year, Clara finished writing a book called Changing Chapters, and she decided to write it after James was killed. He was shot dead, in public. The incident attracted a huge amount of media attention in Perth. Clara's not trying to excuse her brother's criminal behaviour, but she does see a direct line between his violent life and death and the upbringing that they shared, that she saw. What's hard to understand is how Clara's life went one way and her brother's life went in a different direction. Just a couple of things you should know before we get started. First, Clara isn't her real name and James was not her brother's name. She prefers to keep it that way. And secondly, there are some things in this story, stories of sexual abuse, that some people might find distressing. Hello, Clara.
Hello.
Tell me about the home business that your dad had for a while in Perth.
Well, when we were small children, my father ran an illegal gambling thing from our house where he'd set up dice tables, we'd have pennies, anything that he could make money out of illegally. And in those days, how he used to do it was on the pennies that he had, for the tossing of the pennies, he would get special paint which would paint onto the penny, but it would make it heavier on one side. So when the people tossed it up or whatever, he would know exactly where it was going to fall.
It was a fixed two-up game, wasn't it?
It was fixed two-up. And also the dice game that he also ran, he got a special machine from Japan that shaved the dice enough so he could change. So I think on dice they've got 3 heads or 3 tails or whatever. Well, he changed it so it had 2 and 4. So again, he could control how the dice would fall.
Would you help him out with any of this?
I did as a child, and he had baccarat as well, and he used to shave the cards and put them into the baccarat shoes. So I would sit there for hours because, that's what you did as a little girl. And in my home, and we didn't have much else to do. So I would sit there and he would show me how he would shave the cards and also how he would paint the pennies. He'd get me to paint the pennies for him.
What kind of people would come into the house for the gambling?
We had all sorts of people. We had people from the racing industry. We had bookmakers, jockeys, trainers, but we also had politicians that would come. We would also have police officers that would come to the house, brothel madams, and criminals, known criminals from different areas.
What did you and your brother make of all this going on around you? Was it fun?
I think it was fun because when my dad made lots of money, he would give us money. And I can remember at night time I'd be put to bed. My bedroom was the closest to the back of the house. And the nights that the house was raided, because the police would always let my dad know that it was going to be raided, so he'd only have so many people there.
All right, he would be warned ahead of time by police that
He'd be warned, warned ahead of time. And in those days, the police were paid for the warning. But people would stuff money in our beds and stuff like that as the raid was going on so that they wouldn't lose all their money.
Were other family members involved in crime or criminal gangs?
Yeah, I had an uncle that was a notorious man in Sydney. He'd done time in jail. I'm not sure if he'd done time for murder or conspiracy to murder.
Your aunties taught you to shoplift.
They did.
What kind of stuff did you go out to pinch?
Well, anything, I suppose, but one of my particular aunties had a good business with her shoplifting, and she would fill orders for detectives, and they'd give her a list of stuff that they would want: new suits, new shoes, new shirts, new ties, and she would go and fill those orders for them, or other people that had other stuff that they wanted her to get, she would get.
Was that terrifying, going out as a kid to do that, or was it just part of life?
I think it was just part of life. You don't get told something's wrong, so if you're not told, it's just what you do.
Did you ever get caught?
No.
Wow. You must have been good, I suppose.
When I eventually did shoplift for myself, it was purely to supply myself with underwear or just clothing in general. I didn't go and steal myself to do anything like that, but it was just to put clothes on my back.
How was it your parents got married, Clara?
My mum was very religious when she was younger, came from a big Catholic Irish family and got pregnant at 16. Married at 17 by a judge, had to sign the paper. In those days, you were allowed to get married, but your parents had to sign the documents. My grandparents wouldn't sign the documents. So my mum got a judge to sign off.
So she was pregnant with you?
With me, yeah.
With you.
Yeah.
How often would your dad get violent when you were little?
I would say it was probably at least maybe every 2 weeks. The big violence where he would actually hurt her to a point where, you know, she was black and blue or covered in blood or knocked out, or just probably every 2 weeks when he was really drunk. But
would he need the drink to get violent?
No, I was just thinking that, no, and sometimes he didn't. He'd just do it when he was sober. But the real big violent attacks happened when he was drunk, and just maybe the smaller ones were when he was a bit sober.
How brutal did those attacks get?
Pretty brutal. I can honestly say to you, I can't remember the first time my father ever hit my mum because obviously I was young, but I do recall the last. And I think the last time was probably when he attacked her with an axe and dragged her down the street in a car. She was flung out of the car and he just continuously dragged her down the street. So by the time the car had stopped and she'd got up, her skin was ripped off. And then he got an axe out the boot to cut her up, and someone stepped in, a man at her house.
Was this taking place in front of you?
That particular attack didn't. There are other violent attacks that he did. He cut a wall down in our house with a chainsaw. I was about maybe 11 and a half, 12 when that attack happened, and I think that was a huge one. He cut a whole wall down and the whole wall fell, and he kept running at my mum with the chainsaw to cut her head off and stuff like that in front of me and my brother, he was 4 years younger, so he was only about 8. And all, you know, it was just the most horrendous thing I've ever seen in my life.
Did he have a gun?
No, he didn't. But the gentleman, when I finally went down and got help in the middle of the night, he come up with a gun and told my father to put the chainsaw down where he'd shoot him. Was there any point calling the police, given that he was paying police clearly at the time? Yeah. No, we used to call the police to come occasionally, but they would come in those days, and their view was that the man had the right to do this to his wife, and they'd come in and basically say, you know, what did you do to annoy him? You know, maybe you should keep your mouth shut. And that type of tone. They never ever, up until he attacked her with the axe, that he ever got charged. Did you and your little brother ever try and get between them? Yes, I did. My brother and me would be in between them screaming because he'd have my mum by the hair and he'd be kneeing her in the face and stuff like that. And I did. I can remember I grabbed a knife one time and I went to stab him because what he was doing was just so horrible. And then he belt me and my brother, so there was no point doing anything. Did he ever come looking to beat you instead of his wife, or was that only whenever you got in the way? Well, when we got in the way, and a couple of times if my mum was able to escape the house to try and get help, then he would turn on me and my brother and belt us. And most of the time I would shield my young brother and lay on top of him so that I would cop the hiding and not him. Once he'd finished, would he leave the house or would he just sit there? He'd go to bed. He'd go to bed? He'd just go to bed. He could sleep after that? Yeah, he'd just go to bed. What would you and the rest of the family do after he'd finished? Go and lock ourselves in one of the bedrooms. My mum used to push the wardrobe across the door, clean herself up, obviously, because she'd be covered in blood, and we'd just lock ourselves in a bedroom. Did you understand that this is not a normal state of affairs, or did you, for a long while, think, like a lot of kids do, that this is just the way the world is? I honestly did. I honestly thought, wow, this must go on in everyone's house. You know, this must happen because no one ever told me that it didn't happen. So I suppose I thought it went on everywhere. Did your mum ever try and get you and your brother out of there? Only when she sent us away to other family members' houses at different times, you know, like maybe the game was getting too big or whatever the case may be, and so we'd be sent off to another family member's house.
Was she able to turn to her family?
No. Her family never knew about the beatings that happened at the home until I think I was about 12, maybe 12 and a half, and I rang my grandmother when my mum had a breakdown.
And what was their view? Were they happy to would they take her back?
No. They come and helped, but their view was, in those days, you made your bed, you lie in it.
What did your mum say later on in later years when you asked her why she didn't run away?
Well, in those days, there was no help. There was no pensions, there was no single mother's pensions, there was no nothing. So most women probably did stay because there was just no help. I always thought to myself that I would never marry a man that would hit me because I don't like violence. And unfortunately for my brother, he took on violence as his thing, and he had no respect for women.
You mentioned that you were an Irish Catholic family. Was your mum religious at all?
Yes, she was. She was going to be a nun up until, obviously, she got pregnant. That was the end of her wanting to be a nun, I suppose, yeah.
Would she encourage you and your brother to be religious?
Yeah, I was baptised a Catholic and went to church Sunday school up until probably about 10 or 11. And we'd pray for help.
You prayed for help?
Prayed for help, yeah.
And when that help didn't come, what did you think?
Well, as little children, you don't understand. So for me, when I used to pray and the help didn't come, I would just simply think that God was busy and someone else would have to come.
Did your mum give it away? Or did she stay religious?
No, she gave religion away after she had her breakdown because she lost faith in religion, which was a bit sad. But on saying that, I kept my faith. I might not have practiced it for a few years, but I always kept faith that things would get better. My brother wasn't religious at all, and today I still have a faith, yeah.
As a little kid, why did you find it hard to stay in school for very long?
I think when we were at school, because the beatings were so often at home, I didn't want to stay at school because I didn't want to come home and find my mother dead. When we were little kids, my brother was in maybe grade 1 and I was 4 years older, so grade 4 or 5, grade 5 probably, we used to walk to and from school because, it was a bit safer, I suppose, in those days walking to school. So for us, going home to our mother being beaten was probably a nightmare. Like walking in and finding her on the floor dead was worse.
You must have just been, anxious all the time. Anxious.
I am. I still am a very hyperactive person, and I think that's nervous energy. Yeah.
This is hard to talk about this next bit. You were sent to spend some time at your auntie and uncle's house, and that's where you say your uncle abused you. Was he brazen about that, or did he conceal it cleverly?
He would conceal it cleverly. The first time he sexually touched me, or he made me touch him, I think I was about 7, and the abuse went on until I was 14. And he abused my brother as well. But again, in those days, we weren't taught protective behaviours like we teach our own children now. So no one ever said, watch out for, uncle or dad or whatever. We were mainly taught about the stranger on the street and the raincoat and the lollies, but not about someone who was supposedly loving you.
Were you inclined, like the violence, for a little while, to think this was disturbing but normal, this abuse?
I did, and I think the disturbing part for me is that no one tells you that was wrong. So even though my uncle was doing things to me, he never physically, belted me or done anything like that. He did hurt me in a sexual way. But for me, he loved me, and that's what I thought love was.
Because it's bound up in affection.
It was found, yeah.
In kissing and things like that.
And because I had no affection for my own father, who was just so caught up in whatever he was doing, I don't know, maybe, and, it was a horrible time, and I was 14 years old before I realised what he was doing to me was wrong. And again, I go back in time because when I was at school, sex education wasn't done till year 9. And I still clearly remember the conversation that the teachers were having with us in class about people touching you, and my whole world, I think, fell apart at that moment.
By the time you got to high school, what kind of state were you in? What was your...
Well, I was at high school then.
Yeah.
But...
Were you going regularly? Or
No, I used to have a truant officer come and get me from home. He used to come and pick me up and take me to school.
How much trouble did you get into when you were there?
At school? Lots. I used to be caned regularly. Every week I'd be at the principal's office getting the cane because they were allowed to cane children back in those days. And it's quite funny, when I've taken it apart now, I always think, because I deal with children that self-harm, and I never did that. And I sometimes wondered, by me getting the cane, was that way of me self-harming? Because I never cut my own self, but when I got caned, it was the way I think I dealt with it.
Well, that makes a hideous kind of sense, doesn't it? It makes a lot of sense.
It does, yeah.
So you said your parents split up. Your mum, she moved away. She escaped.
She left him, yeah.
She left him. Did she tell him where she was going with you?
Well, we were still living in the same house when they split up, and the only reason she left him was that she had a breakdown after the axe incident, and the Catholic priests used to come and see us all the time that's what they did in those days. And he advised my mum at that point to divorce my father or he'd bury her. So that was it.
Did your dad leave you alone after that?
He used to come and still terrorise us. The beatings calmed down, but he'd still come and terrorise us, and he'd ring us and tell us that he was going to come and get us. And most times I'd have me and my brother in the car ready for my mum. So, we'd sleep in the car a couple of nights a week. We might sleep at the hotel. And when we'd come home, he'd broken into the house and there'd be knives under our pillows and, just axes in the house and just things that he'd left around the house for us to know that he'd been in the house.
Now that you're an adult, what do you think was wrong with him?
I don't know. I'm the sort of person that tries to take problems apart and put them back together and try and find some reasoning why people do the things that they do. And I make no excuse for my father's very bad behaviour by beating his wife. But the woman that he's been with since I was 15, he's never hit, which I find absolutely amazing. Never struck her, nothing. So for me, when I was, probably a few years ago, trying to work out why he did the things he did, I don't know whether he blamed my mum because he had to get married, and so in that blame he became angry and violent.
Did he show shame or remorse when he'd sober up the next day?
No. He'd just tell her to clean up the mess, and we had people coming over. But, she'd be covered in bruising and, her face might be black and blue, and people would just not say anything.
Did your mum get a new partner after a while?
She did. After she left my dad, she met a man who was a number of years younger than her. And obviously me and my brother were still at home because he was younger, and he was not a nice man either. He wasn't violent, but he used to torment her with words and stuff like that. And he used to beat my brother up quite a lot, and he was only quite a young boy then. And I think at 17 my brother hit him, and he never hit him again.
Was your father enraged by the presence of a new man in your mum's life? No,
because he had numerous affairs. So for him, again, that could have been part of the guilt factor why he used to beat her. He went and had affairs with, members of the family and other women. So I don't think it really worried him once she moved on.
Did you start stealing again?
I did, because we had no money. My mum went to work full time, and there was just no money left at the end of the week to buy clothing. And for me, I stole underwear, probably personal things that my mum simply couldn't buy.
How much shame did you feel about your poverty? Because kids have a way of making you feel ashamed when you've got no money.
They do. And, going through puberty and not having any bras or not having anything, and I grew up a pretty tough girl because I suppose that's what you had to do. But it was a horrible place to be when you had no money, and the shame factor is huge. Nowadays, we've got so many agencies that help, but in my days, there wasn't.
So you said once you did sex education in high school, that's when you realised the abuse you'd been suffering at the hands of your uncle was very wrong. Did you take any of that on yourself, Clara? Did you think that somehow you were to blame for what had happened? Which is sadly common amongst children. It
is. I don't really know. I know that at that particular point, I felt incredible shame, incredible self-loathing,
Why? Why? What do you think was at the heart of that?
I just felt dirty. I just felt disgusted in myself that why did I allow him to do these things to me, you know? And I did. I become very promiscuous at that point, and I started to drink because I just wanted to make new memories with bad memories to take away the bad memories, yeah.
Were the other kids at school aware of what was going on in your life?
No, and I just couldn't imagine me telling anyone, no.
How old were you when you got out of school?
The day I turned 15, I walked out of school, and I was 15 at the beginning of the March. Yeah.
Did you walk into anything?
I walked into a job. I had a job then, working with horses. So I moved out of home, and I went and worked on a farm.
How was your little brother James doing without you around?
I used to go and visit him when I had time off work. And as, you know, my mum, I know she done the best she could, but I loved him just as much as she did, and I regret that I couldn't have taken him with me.
You said you became quite promiscuous, and this was all about just trying to obliterate the bad memories with something that was a bit...
Well, there were more bad memories. But,
bad memories. Is that how it turned out?
It did, yes. In the end, it was just more bad memories on top of bad memories.
Was anyone looking out for you at all?
Well,
was
no.
Anyone? Did your grandparents? Anyone?
No, nobody. Even at schools, there was nobody. I think we had someone we used to call a career person that looked out for kids to, find jobs for them and stuff like that. But there was no one at school that you could actually go and talk to. And to be honest, I don't think anyone would have listened anyway.
No teacher who could see behind all this acting out that there must be something awful happening at home? No,
they just put it back down to really bad behaviour, that I was just...
nuisance.
A nuisance and out of control, yeah.
When did you realise, with the drinking and promiscuity, that you weren't having fun? Was there a moment, or did you just fade out?
No, I think there was a moment that I woke up one day and went, this is it, I can't do this anymore. And I'd met a young man who then become part of my life, and I think it was that turning point that he made me see that there was more to it than just doing what I was doing to myself.
So it just took someone from the outside of your life to step in and go,
this is not
like I'm going right now.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah, he was great. Unfortunately, our relationship didn't last. We were together for a few years. But he made me see sense of what was right and wrong.
You sleeping well at night?
I didn't in those days, and I still have... I'm better now. I did for a long time have things where I'd wake up in the middle of the night. I think it was just the fact that it's a learnt behaviour, because I'd be waiting on edge for my father to come home, and I think we just learn not to sleep, or you sleep so lightly that you don't really get a good sleep.
Were traumatic memories of the abuse coming up as well?
They did in my early 20s. I started to have nightmare after nightmare, and I started to question myself, thinking, wow, why would I be thinking stuff like this? Why would I even imagine something like that? Because you don't want to believe that happened, because I think you push the memory so far back, and when they come forward, I think your mind only allows you to remember what you can handle. That's how I seen when I started to have the flashbacks, because they were so hideous that, again, I felt total disgust in myself.
So was that like a kind of pressure, the memory of that sort of, you try and push back, but it knocks on the door?
Keeps knocking.
You knock on the door, and you can't answer that door, can you? Because you've got to function in the world.
Well, you've got to try and function in the world, but you've got to answer the door, because the door's just going to keep coming at you. And that's what it did with me. I had to stop and go, what am I going to do with this? It was such an awful time in my life that I wasn't promiscuous or anything then. I was in a good relationship. I had a good job. But that part of me just kept coming back.
Did you get counselling?
I did. I started to get counselling on and off. I had counselling over a number of years, probably all up to 7 years. Not all at once. Started to. And that's when I got involved with the police and had my uncle charged. And even when I went and seen the counsellor after all that, and she was really great, there were still some things that my uncle done to myself that I still couldn't talk to her about, and I still can't even discuss them today with anybody. To me, they're just so hideous that I just don't think I could cope mentally.
So you'd been thinking about the abuse and you'd had some counselling about it. How did it go when you told your mother and father about the abuse you'd suffered from your uncle?
I asked them both to come, and when I told them that I'd been sexually abused, my mum went grey in front of my. I clearly think that she just went grey in front of my eyes. I could see the memory of us going to that particular uncle's house starting to twirl in her head, because they were the ones that sent us there. My father was different. He jumped up and raved and ranted and blamed everyone else but himself. It was not his fault that this had happened. But my mum, I think it just tore at her heart.
Was your brother there when you told your parents?
No, he wasn't. He was told later. When I say later, maybe a couple of days. He was annoying me on the phone over the week because he could see that clearly there was something troubling me really greatly, and he kept asking me all these sorts of questions. So when he found out, he lost control. He couldn't deal with it because he'd become a bikie at that point in his life, and all of a sudden Pandora's box was opened. And
is that what he said?
Yeah, he said to me, he said, "You've opened Pandora's box." He didn't beat me up as such, but he threw me around a little bit and then he started to cry because he'd built himself into this person. He couldn't deal with the fact that he had to deal with the abuse himself.
Could he talk about that abuse with you?
Not for a very long time. I think he went and got some counselling many years later, and probably prior to his death, we started to discuss about the child abuse that had happened to him.
What did he do with that rage? You said when he shouted at you, "You've opened Pandora's box."
He was so infuriated and angry. He got on his motorcycle and he went down to our uncle and auntie's house with a gun to shoot him. Okay, when he got there, my uncle wasn't there. My auntie came out and greeted my brother, and he asked her, "Did you know what was going on?" With a gun pointed at her, and she said yes. But then he just went into another rage. He didn't hit my auntie or anything. He was crying, and he asked her, "Did you know?" And she said yes. But I think her answer to him was that she didn't know how to stop it.
What did he do then? Did he confront your uncle?
No, the uncle wasn't there. He just obviously, whether he was there hiding, he could have been hiding in the house, no one would have ever known, because he sent his wife out to deal with this very angry person.
Whose idea was it to take your uncle to court for this abuse?
I reported it to, I think it was called SARC in those days, which was the sexual assault clinic, and then they advised me to go to the police, which I did. They took my statements and then they charged my uncle.
You said your brother wouldn't stand with you in court. Why do you think he couldn't do that?
He come to court with me, but he couldn't testify. He didn't want to testify.
Why not?
He just wasn't ready. I think he did testify. He made some statement. I can't remember what it was, but he wasn't ready to tell the world that he had been abused as a little boy. He had now become this big bad bikie. I think that's part of why he became what he did, because he didn't want anyone to hurt him.
Could anyone testify on your behalf?
No, nobody. Because I'd never told anybody.
Your auntie?
She could have, but I think my uncle's lawyer, there was a glitch in the law where she didn't have to testify because she was married to him.
Your mother?
Well, she never witnessed any of the abuse, so she couldn't.
So it was your word against his?
It was my word against his. Oh, my brother did witness some of the abuse, but again, he was only a little boy at the time. And going back that far in memory, it probably wasn't going to be strong enough anyway.
Did your brother ever tell you what it was like for him to witness you being abused?
He did. I can remember talking to my brother about the first time my uncle raped me, which was in the car. And my little brother was in the back seat. And I always thought that he was asleep. And as adults, and he told me that he was awake while the abuse was going on. And for a little boy, he felt sadness because he couldn't protect me. But for me, just knowing the fact that he witnessed those horrible events, again, makes me feel ashamed and, I don't know, disgusted, I suppose, in myself, because I couldn't stop it. I was only a little girl.
You don't feel that way anymore, do you?
I don't anymore. My life's pretty balanced now. But I think you do still have that deep down somewhere in your heart. Yeah.
What was the outcome of the trial against your uncle?
He wasn't found guilty. At the time, the police and the DPP asked me if I would they were going to go back and appeal for the case. You know, they can take it back to court. Would I consider redoing it again? And to me, I couldn't do it again. It was just heart-wrenching. What I went through on the stand was the most awfulest thing. Because I had been promiscuous afterwards, they brought all that up. They painted me to be, you know, this horrible teenage person, but not the child that it happened to.
How was your brother James drawn into the life of a bikie? What brought him into that?
He used to work as a bouncer. He was only a young bouncer. He was 17.
What was he like physically? Was he big?
He made himself big. He started to do heaps of gym work, weights, and he started to use steroids. He done kickboxing. He was quite good at kickboxing. So he'd made himself a machine. And as he got older, he got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Did he ever tell you what was required of him to join? Because they have kind of some pretty interesting initiation processes to get into those gangs. And did he ever talk to you about that? He
did. There was only some things that he told us and some things that we worked out ourselves. They do hideous things, and I think a lot of it's violence, drugs. Was
he using as well?
I don't think he ever used hard drugs. He used to smoke marijuana, but then my brother never drank alcohol. Ironically, the bikies thought he was an undercover police officer in the early days because he never drank, because he didn't drink because of our father, who was an alcoholic.
What kind of drugs was he involved in dealing and distributing?
Methamphetamines, mainly, I think, and marijuana.
How easily did he fit into that world? Did he like it? Was he happy there?
Oh, he loved it. Slipped straight in. It was where he felt the most comfortable. We'd grown up with violence, so violence was his cushion. So he embraced it. He embraced that whole scene.
Do you think there was a kind of structure to that life, even, structure and violence, as opposed to chaos and violence, which is what he'd grown up with?
Yeah, no, I think there is a structure because they have a hierarchy.
They have a law too, don't they? They have laws.
A law amongst themselves, and that's the silence thing where they don't say anything.
What change did you see in him after he joined Clara?
He became more violent, but that was also due to the fact that he was on steroids.
So he was prone to angry outbursts,
yeah. And when he exploded, it was just like, whoa! You didn't want to be anywhere near him. He was a very, very violent man when he exploded. But again, I say to you, he wasn't violent to women. He might have been abusive verbally, but not physically to women. The respect he had for women was nil, because I think he'd seen our mother being beaten so much. That was what if you beat someone long enough, they're going to do what you want. And so his respect for women was gone because our mother stayed in that relationship for such a long time. That's how he figured it out.
He must have been feared. Were you frightened of him at one stage?
I was a little bit, but only when he had his angry outbursts. I don't get frightened much. I'm not a frightened person, believe it or not. I just don't get frightened.
What was your view of that bikie world he was being drawn into?
I have no respect for the bikies. I think they're overgrown bullies who manipulate and suck in young men to do terrible crimes.
Did you tell him that?
Yep, I did.
What did he say?
Told me to mind my own business.
What do you think he got out of being that kind of menacing enforcer figure that he became?
Great. I don't know. Maybe he made him feel good about himself when he beat someone. I don't know.
Do you think he relished feeling powerful?
I do.
We know he'd been powerless.
Yes. So for him, power was a big thing, to be the big bad person. And he used to always say to me, I'm going to be so big and mean that no one is ever going to hurt me again. And no one did until they shot him, yeah.
But, for all that power he'd accrued to himself, he still didn't have enough strength to stand by you in court, did he?
No. It's a different sort of strength, isn't it? I think child abuse destroys part of your soul. It blackens your soul, and some people just can't deal with it.
So he would have ended up in the criminal justice system pretty quickly, I would have thought, after having joined bikie and getting involved in that kind of activity.
He did. He had a couple of drug convictions and violence. Violence was a big thing. He got jailed for violence.
How many years prison did he serve?
He got 7 years, but he only served half of that time because they let them out on good behaviour.
What did he think about why he'd gone to jail? Did he think he'd been stitched up by anyone?
He did. When the 4 men that he was involved with, and they all went and done the same bashing, 2 of them turned Queen's evidence, 2 of the bikies, and my brother and the other bikie, they didn't. So when the time come for sentencing, one got 6 months, one got 18 months, and my brother and another member got 7 years. But for my brother, that was one of the biggest betrayals because he lived by that code. And if they'd all done the same thing, then they all should have served the same time.
What happened after he was released from prison then?
Well, he served the time and the first bikie club evicted him out of the club whilst he was in prison. So that
Why was he evicted?
Because him and the other guy, one of the other members, were going to challenge for leadership prior to going to prison, and the president heard about it, so he didn't do anything until they went to jail. And once they were in jail, then he got them bashed in prison because in the bikie world there's only a couple of ways out. One is that you have to give up your motorcycle to the club, and the other one is you have to get bashed. Unbeknown to my brother that he had been evicted from the first club, he got bashed in prison. So that was his way.
Oh, he wasn't ready for that bashing. What, he'd just been
jumped. He got jumped by 6 men.
So his feelings towards his old gang weren't too crash hot then by the time he
They weren't. I think he was more disappointed, but there were people that had been 20-year members of that particular club that left over what had happened, and they also went and joined other clubs.
So did he join another gang?
Yes,
once
he did.
Got out of prison?
When he got out of prison, he went and joined a second gang, which they approached him and asked him to come and join them, and that they would make him a patch member within 6 months if he done particular tasks, which, again, violence was something that he relished, so he was fine with that. He did promise all of us whilst he was in prison, mind you, that he'd never do anything, never go and join another club, but it lasted like 20 minutes.
So how was this defection to the rival club seen in the original club, the one that he was kicked out of?
Well, they look at it as that you are a dog. That's what they call them.
But they kicked him out.
They kicked him out, that's right, yeah, but
You're not supposed to join another club?
Apparently not, but lots of them do, and they get things done to him. I mean, he had his, the firebomb went through his house. He had a firebomb go through his business.
Then one night in 1998, he was in the Perth outer suburb of Beachboro. What happened that night, Clara?
He had just had his second child. Well, not him. His partner had just had their second child, and he was leaving the house to go and do something to the club. Pulled out of their driveway, and he noticed a car, he said, up the road, and he thought, oh, okay. So as he drove past the car, he recognised the 3 men in the car. He knew them from the other club. And so he went to grab his phone because he was going to ring somebody, another club member from where he was going, but he dropped his phone, he said, and he crouched down to get it, and he thinks that they thought he had a gun. So then they've opened fire on him, and he got hit a couple of times, but he survived that one.
Where was he hit? Do you know?
He was in the arm and on the side of the face. So then he drove himself to the clubhouse where they took him off to the hospital.
Was he ever thinking of leaving bikie culture altogether after that?
No, not for many years after that did he leave. I think it made him more determined to be part of it. Do you know what I mean? Because then, this is serious stuff now. People are shooting at you. You need more than just yourself to protect yourself.
Tell me what you know about the day that James was killed in 2004.
That was a really, probably one of the hardest days of my life. I get up early in the morning. I always have done. I'm a really early riser. And my children were only relatively small at the time. And I had a phone call from a member of my family and said to me, have you heard the news? And I went, no, I've only just, got out of bed. I've only just turned the radio on. He said, someone's been shot and killed. And when I asked him where, I knew that's where my brother went and used to attend a gym there. So I rang a police officer that I had a number for, just in case anything ever happened. And I rang him and I asked him, had he heard anything? And he said, no. I said, don't worry about it, I'll find out. So I rang Central Police Station and I told them who I was and who my brother was, and that there'd been a shooting and was it my brother. The policeman said to me at the time, he goes, "We can't do this. It's not, what we do. It's not protocol." And I got really angry and upset. And I said, "Look, I've got children. I've got a mother. I've got my brother's children. I need to know before this goes to air." And they say who it was. So the police officer went away and he come back and he told me over the phone that it was my brother that had been shot and killed. My brother was waiting to go into the gym that he attended, and apparently someone pulled up on a motorcycle and shot him twice outside the gym. And my brother then broke down the glass door to the gym to get away, and the coward shot him twice in the back.
There was a lot of media attention around this. Were you caught up in that at all?
Not really. I'd done a couple of things for the media. I was horrified that the way it was handled.
Do you mean the reporting of it?
No, the reporting of it was pretty bad. They said some terrible things about my brother in the paper. At the end of the day, I know that he was a bikie and he probably done lots of bad things, but he was still my brother and he was still someone's son and also someone's father. So what the media wrote was really quite bad in those days.
What was the tone? Was it like,
they were calling
comeuppance, was it, or something? Was it?
No, they were calling him a turncoat, calling him a dog, just saying really hideous things about him.
What, journalists doing that?
Yes.
They were
in the paper, and it just went on and on and on and on and on. And, when the person got charged with his murder, it just continued on, that they outlined him to be this horrible dog person that changed clubs. But on saying that, lots of members in my state have changed clubs, people that were high-ranking members of one particular club that my brother was involved with, and they never got one word said about them.
A man was charged.
Yep.
There were three trials of this man. Eventually he was acquitted for lack of evidence.
Yep.
What was the DPP arguing was the motive for the killing of your brother?
That they'd had an argument, that my brother and this man, who had been friends, mind you, for 20 years, that they'd had an argument, and the other person was jealous of my brother being involved with the bikie clubs because this other person they didn't like. There was other theories and other things that happened along the way that they couldn't use, and the lawyer for the person that was charged was very, very clever, and all they had to do was create reasonable doubt because he was a bikie. Could have been anybody. And that's what happened.
Do you have your own view on what actually happened that day?
I do. Well, I have my own view because my brother had told me a story many years before the murder about a situation involving the man that was accused of his killing. I done some investigating and asked lots of questions, and I believe that the man that killed my brother was given no choice. I believe that the bikies told him it was either him kill my brother or they were going to kill him.
It was an assassination.
Yes.
In other words.
Yeah.
A forced assassination.
A forced assassination, yep.
Where is that case now?
It's over because 3 trials, we went back 3 times, and the judge forced the hand of the last jury. They couldn't come back with a unanimous verdict, and she told them to go back, and they weren't going home until they did. It was nearly Christmas time. I think they just wanted to go home. But for me, there was somebody on that jury that believed that that man killed my brother.
Clara, you're working as a school chaplain now. Can you tell when kids are coming from a troubled home?
I think sometimes it can be disguised. You could have a child that plays up terribly at school and it mightn't be any problems at home, or you might have the reverse where you have a child that's very quiet. But I think sometimes there are indicators that warrant that.
I was talking about that anxiety you said you had, and that's, I think that's what psychologists call hypervigilance, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you see that in kids?
I do, and they're the kids that we pull in. We're the ones that pick those pieces up, because in the school system now, and it's a more wonderful system than we've ever had, there's more help for children. School psychologists only see children with mental health problems that have been referred to. Whereas a school chaplain or even as a school youth worker, we pick up all the other kids. So they're the kids that we see. They're the ones that walk along maybe the road that I've walked. And when these kids come and see me and tell me their stories, I truly understand where they come from. And I tell them all the time, I hear you, I know where you're going, and I know where you've been. Sometimes there is a way out, but you've got to get from A to B first.
I can really understand you wanting to do this kind of work, but I could also equally understand you never wanting to ever do anything like that kind of work at the same time. I mean, your heart must really go out to these kids who are in trouble. At the same time, do you ever get that sense of, oh God, here we're going to that place again?
Yeah, I did for a long time. I used to bring my work home in my head. I've tried really, really hard in my own life to give my children a fantastic life where they don't have to worry about, their mother getting beaten or being molested, and I overcompensate. So for a long time I was bringing all the work home with me and getting angry because I couldn't help everybody. It's like, I want to help them all, but you can't. And I think when I got to that point, then I started to ease up a bit. But still, sometimes when I leave school and I've had to leave a child in a situation it's not a good situation, it is hard. But I can't do anything. I'm only one person.
You said your mum was religious and
Yep.
and ordered you to pray when
Yep.
you were little throughout these terrible, violent episodes that your father went through. But then you thought that God was busy and not taking calls at that time, or that's something you concluded. And I know you're a chaplain, which means you obviously have some kind of religious faith. I don't know, where are you at with all these days?
I am a Christian. I don't throw it down people's throats because I don't think that's what people need to hear. But I think as a person working with lots of people that suffer, I find children have nothing to believe in. So they don't have any hope. Do you know what I mean? And they don't have to believe in my God or a God or the God. They just need to believe in something, because when the chips fall down, there is nothing there to pick you up. When I have a child that I've known suicide at 11 because they didn't think there was a way out, they had nothing to hold on to and nothing. And I'm not saying that religion is the answer by all means, but you need to have some sort of faith or some sort of hope, because without it, you can't get anywhere. They just need something. It doesn't need, like I said, it doesn't have to be religion. It can be, they can believe in the butterflies if that's what gets them through the next day. I mean, we're not allowed to practice any sort of religion in schools. So as a school chaplain, it's the one no-no. I'm not allowed to talk about God. I'm not allowed to talk about my religion. I'm not allowed to talk about anything at all to do with religion. So I go in there and realistically, even though I'm a chaplain, I'm a youth worker, because I can't talk about anything anyway.
You and your brother went through the same thing.
Yep.
You saw the same things. And you both suffered abuse at the hands of the same man. Why did your lives turn out so differently? Do you ever think about that?
I do. I don't know whether it was maybe the age thing. My road could have been completely different as well. I could have turned out to be a drug-using prostitute.
But you didn't?
I didn't, no.
Why not? I mean, I suppose instead of asking why did you become,
Why?
maybe you would say why not. Do you have an answer to that?
I think I just found strength in myself. I have conviction. I find that's the word that describes me the best, is I have lots of conviction, and I wanted to be a better person.
That was your conviction? Do you remember thinking that at the time?
No, not at the time. I do now. I think that's my word for me. At the time, I don't know. I don't know why our lives turned out to be different. Like I said, I shunned violence. He embraced violence. Two children in the same home with two different outcomes. I'm not really sure why.
I think it's really kind of sad in a way that you had the courage to take your uncle to court and fight back. Your poor brother showed up with a gun, but
couldn't do anything. No. That's where courage comes in, I suppose. And you don't have to be big and tough to have courage. Courage has to come from inside your heart.
Sure does. Great to speak with you, Clara. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Clara Jobson's book is called Changing Chapters. And if you think you might need to talk to someone about some of the issues that have been brought up today, the number for Lifeline's helpline is 13 11 14.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.